The wind that sweeps across Ibon City carries two songs, one of progress and one of remembrance. From the hilltops, the city shines like polished brass under the sun. Towers of glass scrape the clouds, proud and tall, built by men who believe the future is theirs to shape. Cars roar like restless beasts, and bright lights drown out the stars. Yet when night falls and silence claims the sky, another rhythm stirs. Deep within the alleys of the old quarter, the soft beating of drums tells older stories. Stories of ancestors who traded wisdom for respect, and of a people who knew that gold without goodness is a curse that burns from within. The narrator's voice deepens, calm yet haunting. In Ibon City, where the rich build palaces and the poor build prayers, every soul carries two faces, one for the world and one for the ancestors. Children play beside crumbling walls painted with fading gods. Market women call out blessings as they sell roasted plantain and palm oil. The city breathes, half of it choking on greed, the other half clinging to hope. This is the land where our tale begins, a place where wealth walks proudly, but the heart of tradition still beats beneath its feet. Adana Kalu's mansion stands on Enkay Hill, a mountain of marble and pride that watches over the chaos below. The walls are white as bone, the gardens manicured to perfection, and fountains dance to the rhythm of luxury. But inside, the air feels heavy, like perfume masking something rotten. Adana sits before her grand window, eyes lost in the glittering city. The jewels around her neck glisten like captured stars, but her face holds no light. Her beauty is spoken of across Ibon: smooth skin, regal posture, a voice that can calm storms. Yet those who have met her whisper that her eyes look as though they once saw paradise and were cast out of it. A maid enters quietly, bowing her head. "Madam, your evening tea." Adana nods but says nothing. The porcelain cup trembles slightly in her hand. The aroma of hibiscus rises, sweet but lonely. Downstairs, servants whisper as they work. They say she owns half the city. Yes, but she sleeps alone in a house big enough for 100 souls. Maybe gold fills her bed where love once lay. They chuckle softly, though their laughter fades quickly. None dare speak too loud in Enkay Hill's mansion, for wealth may buy silence, but it cannot silence truth. The narrator speaks again, voice layered with wisdom. A woman who has everything is still poor if peace does not live in her home. Adana's story is one of triumph and tragedy. She was once the wife of Chief Amaka Kalu, a man whose business empire reached from the heart of Lagos to the ports of Dakar. But behind every brick of his empire lay a debt unpaid, a promise broken, a heart forgotten. When the chief died suddenly, some say from sickness, others whisper from guilt, Adana inherited his empire. Factories, lands, luxury apartments, all hers. Yet what should have been freedom felt like a funeral that never ended. She spends her mornings signing contracts and her nights counting silence. The city bows to her name, yet no one dares to look her in the eye. To them, she is Madame Kalu, the Iron Widow, the woman who built walls around her grief and crowned herself Queen of Solitude. A storm begins outside, distant thunder rolling over Ibon. Adana watches the rain trace lines down the glass, each droplet catching the faint reflection of her face. For a brief moment she sees not a queen, but a prisoner, trapped in a golden cage of her own making. Her mind drifts to her late husband's final words, spoken on a hospital bed smelling of antiseptic and guilt. "Adana," he had said weakly, "promise me you'll protect the empire." He never asked her to protect her heart. Now, years later, she has done exactly that, locked it away, deep and untouched. But even the strongest cages rust over time. Her phone buzzes with messages, business proposals, party invitations, charity galas. She ignores them all. Her gaze shifts once more to the city below, to the part where glass turns to tin roofs and luxury fades into struggle. Somewhere beneath those roofs, children laugh without gold. Lovers share bread without shame, and people still greet the morning with songs of gratitude. Adana whispers to herself. her voice softer than the rain. How do they smile when they have nothing? The narrator answers in a tone that feels like it comes from the ancestors themselves. Because joy is not born in the pocket, my child. It is born in the heart. And the heart, unlike gold, does not lose its shine when shared. The thunder grows louder. The lights flicker. A single candle burns near her bedside, casting a small circle of warmth in a mansion built for shadows. She closes her eyes, but sleep will not come. Outside, the drums of the city's poorer quarter begin to play again, a distant rhythm carried by the wind. Adana listens. The beat feels alive, pulsing through her walls, through her heartbeat, through the silence that has ruled her life for too long. Somewhere deep inside, something stirs, faint but undeniable, and though she does not know it yet, that same rhythm will soon lead her feet down from her marble throne and into the muddy lanes of Makoko, where truth, humility, and purpose wait to remind her what it truly means to live. The narrator closes this part of the tale with a whisper. She owned half the city, yet her spirit owned nothing. But when a caged bird finally hears the songs of the free, it will always find the courage to fly. The mansion stood high upon Nkume Hill, watching over Ibun City like a silent king guarding his secrets. Its walls gleamed white under the sun, but that whiteness carried no warmth, only the chill of loneliness. When the wind blew, it hummed softly through the corridors, as if whispering to the ghosts that lived in the corners of its marble halls. From her balcony, Adana Kalu stood every evening, her silk robe brushing against the cool railings. Below her, the city pulsed with life, honking cars, market laughter, music rising from the taverns. But up here, silence ruled. Her mansion was her fortress, her crown, and her cage. She looked down at the lights flickering like scattered stars. All of this, she murmured, and yet, her voice faded into the wind. A single tear, quick and quiet, rolled down her cheek, but she brushed it away before it could betray her. Inside, her servants moved carefully, footsteps soft, eyes lowered. No one dared to laugh too loudly or speak without being called. They knew the house had rules unspoken, spirits unseen. Some said that at night, when the moonlight touched the marble floors, shadows moved by themselves. Others swore they heard a man's voice echo from the master's study. Adana's late husband, Chief Kalu, whose portrait still hung on the wall, staring with eyes that never closed. In the kitchen, whispers floated like smoke. "Her heart is frozen," one maid muttered as she scrubbed a pot. "Frozen?" another whispered, glancing toward the door. "It was buried with the chief. They say she traded love for gold, and now gold has chained her." The old cook, Mama Ifeoma, sighed deeply. "Hush, children. The wind carries more than leaves on this hill. Be careful what you speak before it answers you." But the maids only giggled nervously, crossing themselves with shaky hands. "Still," one said, "no woman can live that long without a heart. Something must melt it one day." That something came one morning, quiet as dawn. The new driver arrived in an old blue truck that looked out of place against the mansion's polished gates. His name was Chike, a tall man with a calm face and steady eyes that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. Before stepping through the gates, he bowed to the guards, then greeted the elders who sold fruit by the roadside. When he entered the compound, he paused, touched his chest, and whispered a short prayer. The guards exchanged glances. It had been a long time since anyone bowed in that house. Adana noticed him from her balcony as he parked the car and dusted his trousers. "A new driver?" she asked her head maid. "Yes, madam. His name is Chike. They say he used to drive for the bishop's son." Adana's eyes lingered on him for a brief moment. "Tell him to be punctual. I dislike lateness, that was all." To her, he was just another shadow behind the wheel. But to the others, his presence stirred something forgotten. He greeted everyone with warmth, called the elderly women Mama, and carried water for the gardener when the sun grew too harsh. The maids found themselves smiling more. The guards began to joke again. Even the house dogs, who rarely barked, wagged their tails when Chike passed by. "Strange man," Mama Ifeoma whispered one evening. He moves like one who carries peace in his pocket. Peace? One maid laughed softly. In this house? Impossible! But Mama only smiled. My child, even a dry well can fill again if rain finds it. And as the moon rose over Enkay Hill that night, its silver light slid across the marble walls and touched Adana's window. Inside, she stirred from restless sleep, feeling, for the first time in years, a strange calm in the air, as if the house itself had sighed in relief. Far below, in the servants' quarters, Cheeky knelt beside his small wooden bed, whispering his nightly prayer. Let this house know peace again, he said softly, his voice steady as the night. Even if no one remembers how to ask for it. Even if no one remembers how to ask for it. Outside, the wind carried his words upward, brushing against the mansion's walls like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Every evening, when the sun began to lower its fiery head behind the hills, Cheek would take off his driver's coat, fold it neatly over his arm, and pick up his small, worn satchel. He never left it behind, not once. The servants noticed how he slipped quietly through the side gate, refusing the guard's offer to call him a cab or give him a ride. Brother Chike, where do you go every night? One of the younger maids asked one evening, her eyes full of curiosity. He smiled, that soft, unreadable smile that made people trust him even when he said nothing. There are people I must see, he replied gently. That was all he ever said. The guards often watched him walk away, his figure fading down the hill, swallowed by the city lights. Strange man, one muttered. He walks like a priest but speaks like a traveler. Another chuckled. Maybe he's courting a woman down there. The old cook, Mama Ifeoma, shook her head. No, his steps are too steady for romance. That man walks with purpose, maybe even with secrets. The maids giggled, but even they knew something about Cheeky felt different. He greeted everyone with respect, spoke little, and carried a peace that seemed almost holy. His humility unsettled those who lived in a house where pride had long built walls. Adana noticed him too, though she would never admit it. From her balcony, she sometimes saw him walking through the compound gates at dusk, a man of few words, no vanity, and a satchel that looked older than the mansion itself. She found herself wondering what it carried. Documents? Money? Memories? Each thought was a pebble in the calm river of her mind, disturbing her peace. Days passed, and her curiosity grew like a vine she could not cut. She began to notice things that she had ignored before, the missing loaf from the kitchen shelf, the untouched lunch that Cheeky carried home every day, the faint smell of smoke clinging to his clothes when he returned at dawn. At first, she dismissed it as nothing, but soon the questions began to bite. One afternoon, she called the head maid. "Where does the driver go at night?" she asked casually, though her tone carried the weight of command. The maid bowed her head. "Madam, we do not know. He leaves after his duties and returns before sunrise." Adana's brow tightened. "And no one has asked him?" The maid hesitated. "He is not easy to question, madam. There is something," she searched for the right word, "quiet about him. It makes one feel ashamed to pry." Ashamed? The word stung her pride. That night, Adana sat alone at her dining table. The candles flickered against the polished silver, and her reflection shimmered in the glass before her. Her own face, flawless, composed, stared back, but the reflection seemed to mock her. "You command a city," it whispered in her mind, "but cannot command your curiosity." Her jaw tightened. "He is a servant," she murmured to herself. "A servant should have no secrets." But her heart, that stubborn prisoner, refused to listen. The next evening, she walked through the quiet corridors of the servants' quarters, the air heavy with the scent of soap and coal. Voices drifted from behind a half-open door, hushed, nervous. "They say the driver goes into the slums each night," one maid whispered. "The slums?" another gasped. Why would a man like him go there? I don't know, came the reply. But Mama Ifeoma said she saw him giving food to children last week. Adana froze mid-step. The word slums hung in the air like thunder. She had never been there, never even looked that way when her car passed through the lower roads. That world of tin roofs, smoke, and barefoot children was one she had built walls to forget. And yet, now it pulled at her like a forgotten melody. Her breath caught. Anger stirred, not at Cheek, but at herself. For years, she had built her world on control and caution. But this man, this quiet stranger, had slipped past both without effort. Her hand trembled as she turned away from the door. Somewhere deep inside, something old and long buried began to stir. Not anger, not envy, but a restless intrigue. And as she walked back toward her grand hall, the echo of her own footsteps seemed to whisper, "When curiosity wakes the heart, even marble walls cannot silence its call." Cha the night carried a voice, the kind that only elders could hear, the kind that whispered warnings between thunderclaps and sighs of wind. Somewhere between the trees that guarded Nkumi Hill, the wind began to hum. And through that hum, the voice of the ancestors spoke, soft yet heavy like the sound of rain before a storm. "In the land of men," the voice said, slow and steady, "curiosity has teeth. It bites those who feed it too well." The words seemed to travel through the air, circling the mansion that stood high on the hill, white and proud, yet empty as a calabash left in the sun. The curtains trembled. The lanterns flickered. And in that moment, it was as if the walls themselves were listening. The ancestors' warning lingered, not as fear, but as prophecy. For in every tale, before truth arrives, the spirits must first make their presence known. The wind howled louder, drumming against the windows like an impatient messenger. It carried with it the scent of the coming storm, the kind that cleanses and destroys at once. Far inside the mansion, Adana stood by her window, staring down at the city that glittered below like a bed of stars. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass, a woman dressed in wealth, but wrapped in silence. The diamonds on her fingers caught the light of the moon, flickering like restless thoughts. She spoke softly, her voice almost trembling. "Why, do you haunt my peace, Cheeky? Why do your steps echo louder than my own thoughts?" But the room gave her no answer. Only the night, thick with the hum of distant drums, replied with its quiet rhythm. Her gaze drifted over the horizon, where the poor side of the city lay hidden beneath the shadows. She imagined him walking those narrow paths, his satchel pressed to his chest, his eyes unafraid of the darkness. Something inside her, something buried for years under pride and marble, began to stir. "Tomorrow night," she whispered, her voice firmer now. "I'll follow him." The words felt strange on her tongue, like a confession and a promise woven into one. She placed a hand against the window pane, feeling the cool breath of the night seep through. Outside, the wind grew stronger. It roared against the mansion's pillars and beat the earth like a talking drum calling the ancestors to witness. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. Somewhere closer, a bell chimed midnight. The moon shone brighter, spilling its silver light over her face. For a moment, she looked less like a queen and more like a seeker, a woman about to step beyond the walls that had long defined her. The drums of destiny rolled faintly through the distance, blending with the rhythm of her heart. And though no one else could hear them, the night itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for her next move. By the time she turned away from the window, her decision had already been sealed in the silence between her words. For in the land of the living and the dead, the ancestors had already whispered their truth. When curiosity wakes under moonlight, it is no longer a question. It is the beginning of fate. The night before her journey, Adana stood before her. Mirror, staring at the woman looking back, a queen stripped of her crown. The scarf wrapped tightly over her head hid the waves of gold that once dazzled the eyes of reporters and rivals alike. Her wrists, bare of their bracelets, felt strangely light. The silence of her mansion pressed against her ears, broken only by the faint hum of the city far beyond her gates. For the first time in many years, she saw herself not as the billionaire the world feared, but as a woman who had forgotten the taste of freedom. She reached out and touched the mirror's cold surface. "Is this what I have become?" she whispered. A stranger stared back, weary eyes beneath fading glamour, a smile that had been bought too many times and sold even more. In that reflection, Adana felt the weight of her riches fall away like dust shaken off old cloth. The disguise was not just for others, it was for herself. Beneath that plain wrapper, humility was born, quiet, trembling, and new. The dawn broke soft and gold over Lagos. Adana slipped into her modest car, the kind that no one would look at twice. Her driver, unaware, had already left in his battered taxi. She followed from a distance, heart thumping with a thrill she hadn't felt in decades. The polished streets gave way to chaos, to life. The city moved like a restless drumbeat, horns blaring, vendors shouting, children darting between cars like small spirits. As her car rolled forward, she watched the world shift around her. The towers of glass and steel faded into rows of cracked concrete and peeling paint. Streetlights gave way to smoky fires burning in metal drums. Neon colors dissolved into the soft, dusty browns of forgotten alleys. The air grew thicker with heat and humanity, and somewhere inside her, a voice, perhaps her late mother's, perhaps her own conscience, spoke. When the rich walk into the darkness of the poor, the moon itself holds its breath. For every turn her driver took, Adana followed, from the boulevards of the blessed to the lanes of the burdened. She saw women balancing water on their heads with the grace of royalty, men laughing in the face of hunger, and children turning scraps into toys. There was pain in the streets, yes, but there was also a strange kind of peace, a rhythm that belonged to those who had learned to live without asking the world for permission. The last stretch of road seemed to crumble under her tires, and then it ended. Before her stretched a world she had only ever seen in photographs and pity-driven charity reports. Makoko, the city that floated on water. The air carried the scent of smoke and fish, and the sound of wooden paddles dipping rhythmically into the murky lagoon. Shanties built on stilts stood like fragile giants, their reflections trembling on the water's surface. Barefoot children chased each other along narrow planks, their laughter echoing against the waves. Women with bright wrappers stirred bubbling pots over open fires, their voices rising in song, songs that spoke of endurance, of faith, of the kind of strength money could never buy. Adana gripped the steering wheel tighter. Her manicured fingers looked out of place against the cracked leather. For the first time, fear and awe mixed inside her chest. She had read about this place in reports, always with a detached tone, as if poverty were a picture one could hang on a boardroom wall. But standing here now, breathing in the thick, honest air of Makoko, she understood. She whispered under her breath, This is where life hides." Her eyes followed Cheek as he parked his taxi near a rickety dock and greeted a woman who waited with a basket of fish. They laughed, an easy, open laughter that belonged to people unafraid of being seen. Adana's heart sank, not in jealousy but in longing. How long had it been since she had laughed like that? Since her joy was not scheduled, priced, or photographed? A single tear slipped down her cheek. The disguise had done its work. It had stripped her not of her wealth but of her walls. In the floating heart of Makoko, Adana, the billionaire queen, began to remember what it meant to be human. The night had folded itself around Makoko like an old blanket. Lanterns flickered along the shanty paths, their dim light trembling against the dark waters. Adana parked her small car behind a broken canoe and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the faint hum of crickets and the distant laughter of children reached her ears. Ahead, Cheek's shadow moved toward a weathered wooden hut glowing faintly beneath the soft lantern light. The shack looked fragile, its walls patched with palm fronds and cardboard. Yet something about it pulsed with life. as though the lantern itself guarded secrets within. Adana's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her scarf tighter. Her heart beat like distant drums as she watched Cheeky unpack his old satchel. Out came chalk, worn books with torn covers, a few fruits, loaves of bread, and bottles of water. Nothing in his actions spoke of guilt or secrecy, only quiet purpose. Then, from the narrow alleys, children began to appear, barefoot, smiling. Their laughter broke the heaviness of night. Adana leaned forward, her breath catching. The shack that she had followed him to, the one she had thought might hide betrayal, was instead filling with the purest innocence she had ever seen. She whispered under her breath, "What are you doing here, Cheeky?" Through the cracks of the wooden wall, she peered inside. Cheeky stood before the small group, his eyes bright in the lantern's glow. He picked up a piece of charcoal and drew on an old piece of cardboard propped against the wall. "Eh?" he said gently, writing the letter. "Now say it after me," the children echoed, their voices small but eager. "Good," he smiled. "And what comes next?" A little boy shouted, "B!" and the others clapped their tiny hands. When one child wrote a crooked letter, Cheeky laughed softly and patted his shoulder. "Do not fear mistakes," he said kindly. "Even the sun learns to rise slowly." His words rolled through the air like a proverb carried on wind, simple but full of wisdom. Adana's chest tightened. She had seen many men with power, men who demanded respect by force. But here stood her driver, teaching the children of the slum to dream, to spell their names, to believe that they mattered. The way he looked at them, patient, kind, almost fatherly, made something deep inside her begin to ache. She noticed then the food, the bread, the fruits, the bottled water. Her eyes widened as realization struck. They were from her home, the very same loaves that her servants threw away after dinner, the fruits that were too ripe for her taste, the bottles once stored for her guests. Here they were, shared like sacred offerings. The children reached out for them with joy. Cheeky handed each piece carefully, as though he was giving them treasure, not leftovers. "Eat," he said. "A full stomach is the beginning of learning." A girl, no older than 7, held her bread and whispered, "Uncle Chike brings us food from heaven." Adana covered her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She leaned her head against the steering wheel, shaking silently. Heaven? No, it was her waste. Her abundance that had found new meaning in the hands of a man with nothing. She listened as the children murmured blessings before they ate, their small voices rising like incense into the humid night. Each amen hit her heart like a stone skipping across still water. Pride cracked, layer by layer, and from the cracks poured something she had not felt in years: humility. A woman nearby began to hum. Her voice was low and warm, weaving through the air like smoke from a sacred fire. The melody spoke of rivers, ancestors, and hope. Slowly, the children joined in, clapping softly in rhythm. The words carried an old meaning. "A child fed in love will feed the world in peace." Cheek's face softened. He hummed along, eyes glistening as he looked around at the children. The sound wrapped the shack in something holy. It was not just a song. It was a prayer, a story older than memory, passed from mother to child, from elder to village, from sorrow to survival. Adana closed her eyes. The music pierced through the silence that had ruled her soul for years, the silence built by greed, success, and loneliness. Every note peeled away the armor she had worn for too long, and then quietly, she broke. Tears rolled down her cheeks, unashamed and unstoppable. She wept not for loss or for power, but for truth, the raw, unpolished truth of life that she had forgotten. In that small car, hidden in the shadows of Makoko, the city's richest woman became its most humbled. The narrator's voice rose in her mind like an ancient whisper. Even the river knows. It is not the full pot that overflows, but the one that learns to give. The lantern flickered in the distance, and through her tears, Adana saw Cheeky lift one of the children and spin him playfully. Laughter filled the night again, bright and real. Adana pressed her hand over her heart, whispering to herself, "Maybe. This is where my story truly begins." The night clung to Adana like a heavy cloak. Her hands still trembled on the steering wheel, her breath shallow. What she had seen refused to leave her. Cheeks' gentle laughter, the hungry children's smiles, the song that had melted through the dark. Inside her chest, something unfamiliar stirred. Shame, awe, compassion, all twisting together like restless winds. She looked down at her wristwatch, its diamonds catching the dim light. For years it had been her compass, marking meetings, profits, and deadlines. But tonight the ticking sounded different, slower, softer. "So this is what time means," she whispered to herself, voice trembling. "Not money, but moments that feed others." Her heart trembled as the truth settled in. Wealth was no longer measured by gold, but by the warmth of giving. From the shack, distant laughter echoed again. Cheek's voice rose in prayer with the children, humble and steady. Adana placed a hand over her chest, fighting the urge to step out, to thank him, to tell him that his light had reached her darkness. But pride still stood at the door of her heart, whispering, "Not yet." She turned the key, and her car hummed to life. The headlights sliced through the narrow streets as she drove away, careful not to be seen. The city, once loud and proud, now whispered behind her wheels, a quiet song of truth. Every corner she passed felt changed, as though the night itself had seen her secret. By the time she reached the upper roads, the lights of her mansion glittered ahead like a false crown. The gates opened silently, but the house beyond looked different, grand yet hollow. She stepped inside and paused. The marble floors no longer shone with pride, but with emptiness. Her heels clicked faintly against the silence. The air was heavy, the room still. Even the portraits of her ancestors seemed to watch her with quiet judgment. She pulled off her scarf and looked into the tall mirror in the hallway. For a long time she stared, at the fine clothes, the painted lips, the tired eyes. Then she whispered, "Who are you now?" The narrator's voice rose like the sound of an elder speaking by the fire. The eyes of pride saw a man of dust, but the eyes of truth saw a man of gold. Adana's reflection shimmered through her tears. The woman staring back was no longer the queen of business, but a student of humility, one who had walked into the dark and found light. She touched her chest gently where her heart still beat fast and said softly, "Tomorrow, I must speak to him." Outside, the wind carried a faint echo of children's laughter. The mansion, for the first time in years, felt alive again, not with wealth, but with the breath of change. The lantern's light flickered softly through the cracks of the wooden shack, painting golden shapes across the dirt. Adana's breath trembled as she leaned forward, her eyes wide, her heart pounding like a distant drum. Inside, Cheeky sat among a circle of children, their bellies thin, their eyes bright with gratitude. He smiled as he tore bread into small pieces, handing them out one by one. "This bread," he said gently, "comes from hands that may not know your names, but the spirits know who shares." Adana's throat tightened. It was her bread, the same bread her cooks often threw away without thought. The same fruit she refused when it wasn't perfectly ripe. Yet here, beneath the humble lantern, that food had become a feast of hope. The children ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were gold. Laughter filled the air, soft and pure, rising above the slum's quiet night. One girl, no older than 7, whispered, "Uncle Chike, will the bread come again tomorrow?" Cheeky smiled, his eyes kind. "As long as the sun rises and my hands can carry, no child of Makoko will sleep hungry." Adana pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting the wave of emotion crashing inside her. The light from the lantern wavered, and in its glow, she saw something she had long forgotten: humanity. The narrator's voice rose then, deep and ancient, like an elder speaking by a fire. "When the eyes of the proud meet the hands of the humble, truth walks naked before them." The words hung in the air like a spell. Adana's eyes burned with tears as she watched him wipe the crumbs from his lap. Still smiling, still patient, Through the broken wall, she saw the chalk marks, crooked letters scratched onto old cardboard. The alphabet of dreams. Cheeky knelt as he wrote. B, C, he said softly, and the children repeated after him, voices shaky but eager. Their laughter carried through the night like a hymn. She noticed now, the satchel he brought each night wasn't just food. Inside were notebooks, pencils, and pieces of chalk worn down to dust. Her chest tightened when she realized these things were bought with his own wages, the coins he could have used for himself. A woman passing by slipped a few coins into his hand. "For the children, Uncle Chike," she said. He bowed deeply, gratitude shining in his eyes. Adana's vision blurred. She thought of the millions sitting in her accounts, idle, lifeless, sleeping behind digital walls, while this man used pennies to build a kingdom of learning. The shame burned hotter than the engine of her car. When she finally turned away and drove back, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and shadow. Her reflection stared back from the window, pale and silent. "Who are you?" she whispered to it. "A queen who forgot her people?" Pride, her oldest companion, sat quietly beside her. But tonight, it had no voice. Only humility spoke, soft, steady, and true. Her mansion loomed ahead, tall and glowing, yet as she stepped through the doors, a strange emptiness met her. Every chandelier seemed to sigh. The marble floor, once gleaming with pride, felt cold beneath her feet. The silence of wealth wrapped around her like a chain. She paused in the grand hallway, gazing at her reflection in a glass panel. The woman staring back looked smaller now, not from poverty, but from truth. The house that had once made her feel untouchable now pressed in on her, heavy with memories of loneliness she had buried beneath gold. That night, as she lay awake, the ghosts of her past came whispering. Her husband's laughter echoed faintly in her mind, warm, yet tainted with greed. She remembered his voice saying, "Power feeds those who dare to take." But now, she wondered what price had been paid for all that they took. She saw the factories, the workers, the faces of the forgotten. Tears welled as guilt pricked her heart like thorns. She turned her head toward the window, where the faintest glimmer of dawn crept in. "Maybe," she murmured, "it's time to give back what was never truly ours." Outside, the first rooster crowed, a reminder that even after the darkest night, the sun always finds its way home. The laughter of children still lingered in Adana's ears long after she left the dusty streets. It was not the laughter of plenty, but of hearts content with little. Their giggles rose like music, chasing away the heaviness in her chest. She could still see their faces, small, bright, and full of hope, eating with hands that trembled from hunger, yet glowed with gratitude. Adana leaned against her car, eyes shut tight. Her world of silk and marble felt distant, almost foolish. Each laugh echoed against the walls of her heart, breaking something old and awakening something new. "Those children," she whispered, voice trembling, "they have nothing, yet they have peace." In that moment, something long buried within her, a softness, a forgotten kindness, began to breathe again. The morning sun rose over Eben City with whispers, not warmth. On every corner, folded papers fluttered like wounded birds, each one bearing Adana's name in black, bold letters. "Billionaire widow caught with driver in slum," screamed the headline. Below it, twisted pictures told lies too heavy for truth to stand against. Vendors laughed as they passed the papers. "Ah, see how the mighty fall," one woman murmured. Children read aloud, giggling at words they did not understand. In her mansion, Adana sat still, the paper trembling in her hand. The ink smeared where her tears fell. "They took kindness," she whispered, "and turned it into shame." Outside, the city gossiped like restless drums. The woman once praised for her beauty and wealth had become a story, one told with mocking tongues. But deep within her, a strange calm began to grow, like silence after thunder. The storm screamed like a wounded spirit, tearing through Makoko's narrow lanes. In the middle of the chaos, Adana stumbled through the flood, Her arms stretched toward a faint cry. "Mama Hope! Mama Hope!" A small boy wailed, clinging to her soaked dress as the water swirled around his tiny body. "Hold on, my child," she cried, lifting him high above the raging water. Her tears mixed with the rain, her breath ragged but steady. The gold bangles once proud upon her wrists now weighed her down like guilt, yet she did not let go. In that moment, something inside her broke. Not in weakness, but in rebirth. The woman who once counted diamonds began to count lives. The proud widow died there in the storm, and Mama Hope, the mother of many, was born beneath the weeping sky. The morning sun poured through the curtains like gold melting into daylight. Adana sat at her table, pen in hand, eyes glistening. Before her lay documents, thick, official, bearing her signature. She had decided. A part of her vast fortune would no longer sleep in cold banks or buy meaningless luxuries. She would turn it into hope, a trust for the children of the slums. Her voice trembled as she signed the final page. "Let these coins speak for those who were never heard," she whispered. The narrator's voice rose like an ancient wind. The hands that once clutched gold now scatter seeds. And from that moment, her wealth began to bloom in hearts, not vaults. A new kind of treasure born from repentance. New kind of treasure born from repentance.